You can now follow me on all my social media platforms to find out who my latest guest will be. And don't forget to click the subscribe button and the notifications button so you're notified for when my next podcast goes live.
Yeah, he was a absolutely weird sort of case, really, because he'd break into these houses where mostly women, but some men, and all elderly, all very, very much those that lived alone and been in the house for a long time, and they must have felt so secure in their own bed at night. And he would break in, he'd remove the light bulbs or turn the electricity off so they couldn't put a light on. He'd hide their phones so they couldn't call for help. And they'd be woken up by this dark figure looming over them, shining a torch in their face. The guy who was refused admission set light to the place. 11 people died. It's back in, I think it was 94. And did all 11 post-mortems in one day. That was a bizarre day. It was just such a. And that deals with the Levi Belford investigation. So that was, Levi Belford was this horrible serial murderer and paedophile who is the only man ever to be given whole life sentences at 2 different trials in the country. He killed 2 young women in South London, tried to kill another one. That was my case. And of course, he'd also killed Millie Dowler, which was
How do you deal with that then at the start? Like when you get put forward to then try and catch one of the biggest serial killers on the loose at that time?
The first reaction is, am I up to it? I'm not going to lie. That was, that's how I felt.
In what way?
Well, I know this is going to be really high pressure. When you watch, when you read a book or you watch a film or whatever, there's always this pressure, isn't there, on the detectives. Can they catch him before he strikes again? That's what is so common. I was living that for real. That was going to be my life. I was actually literally on me was going to be that pressure. If we don't catch him, how many more is he going to kill?
Boom, we're on. And today's guest, we've got former Detective Colin Sutton. How are you, Colin?
I'm very good, thanks, James. Nice to be here.
Yeah, great to see you. Very fascinating stories. You've wrote a couple of books as well. But one of your biggest cases, your last case, I think, before you were retired, you were called in to try and find the UK's biggest sex predator. He was nearly at large for 20 years. He was breaking into old folks' houses at 70 and 80, and he was raping them and doing some dark shit, male and female. And thankfully, you came on the scene and eventually caught him. But first of all, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, I'm very good. It's been a bit of a manic few days with a book coming out and then the drama series coming out on telly, and my phone's been a bit hot. But yeah, it's been it's been good. It's been good. It's both the book and the TV series seem to have been really well received. So I'm really pleased.
Yeah, that's a great thing, man. Especially giving it more publicity as well. Like some of these times, these sick crimes don't get mentioned enough. Like this guy, was it Delroy Grant?
Yeah, Delroy Grant. That's him. Yeah.
Was on the run for nearly 20 years, like raping old women and men and breaking into their homes.
Yeah, he was a absolutely weird sort of case, really, because he'd break into these houses where mostly women, but some men, and all elderly, all very, very much those that lived alone and been in the house for a long time, and they must have felt so secure in their own bed at night. And he would break in, he'd remove the light bulbs or turn the electricity off so they couldn't put a light on. He'd hide their phones so they couldn't call for help. And they'd be woken up by this dark figure looming over them, shining a torch in their face. He was in control. I think he liked that part of it, and he'd talk to them sometimes for hours. And occasionally he would rape them. Quite often he would indecently assault them. And then steal virtually nothing, steal 20 quid or a few bits of jewelry or something like that. I don't think he was in it for the money. He wasn't in it to make a profit. I think he really got off on the thought of being able to go in there and do that to other people. He's just a unique, I hope, individual.
Yeah, power trip, kind of controlling freak. Yeah. Some sick shit that. But you've got some other fascinating cases, Colin, which we'll touch on later in the interview. But I always go back to the start of my guests, where you grew up and how it all began.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Enfield in North London. and my father was a police officer. He was a traffic cop, actually, PC, and I went to school in North London. Normal sort of things as a kid, played football badly. No, I didn't play too badly, actually. I played for the local sort of representative side and things like that. Did okay at school, went to university, but from about 12 or 13, I'd really wanted to be a police officer. And so I started off, joined the Met and started off as a PC at Tottenham in North London in 1981, which was an interesting place. It was, I think in those days, the suburbs of London were a lot quieter and a lot more sort of genteel in some ways. And London's just sort of spread out into them now. So just 7 miles down the road from where I lived in Enfield, Tottenham was a very different place, in 1981. Bit of a culture shock, really. It was very busy. There was a lot of crime. There was a lot of public order stuff to do at Tottenham Hotspur Football Club, and things like that. So I kind of got a good grounding in policing, I guess. It was, it was the sort of place you either sink or swim. And I think, fortunately, I swam just about.
How did people treat you with your dad being a police officer?
Yeah, it was good, really, in some ways, because I'd kind of grown up with seeing him and his colleagues and his friends. And so I'd kind of grown up within that environment. And, there were a lot of people there when I joined that knew my dad and knew who I was. And so, yeah, it kind of, I guess it probably helped me that I knew quite a bit about the kind of culture and what it was like before I went in.
Yeah, so it's just ingrained into you straight away that you wanted to kind of fight crime.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when I joined, I never dreamt of being a detective. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Probably didn't want to do what Dad did in traffic because I'd have had to have ridden a motorbike and it scared me stiff. But I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and it was only really when I did a few months working and got involved in investigating some crimes, I kind of realised that I liked doing that, and I liked almost a mental challenge. I'm the sort of guy who does the crossword in the paper and goes to quiz nights in the pub and things like that. It's just a sort of a mental challenge, I suppose. And that's kind of how I lent that way and went down that path.
What age did you join the force?
I was 21.
Was there an age limit then? Was it 21 you had to be to join?
No, you had to be 18 and a half. But
Mm-hmm.
I said I'd been off to university where I didn't actually finish. I went to Leeds to read law, and I hated being away from London. I think I was too young, too immature. If gap years had been a thing then, I'd probably have carried on and done it, and we wouldn't be sitting here, But of course, it's quite ironic. I gave up after a year and a term and joined the police. And just 4 or 5 years later, the police sort of said, "Oh, you haven't got a degree," and they sent me back. And I went full time to University College London. And I did my law degree there.
While in the police force?
Yeah, while I was in the police. Yeah.
How did you manage that then?
They just wrote me off duties. I was just doing it full time, like I was a student.
Oh, that's good, man.
Yeah.
Why did they do that?
There was a scheme they used to have. I think it was a hangover then from the days when far fewer people went to university anyway. And I'd got onto this sort of accelerated promotion scheme. And every year they ran this scheme, and they had 6 places for people to apply to go and do a scholarship at university. The course I happened to be on, there were only 5 of us who didn't have degrees. So we all applied and we all got it. Mm-hmm. And I think as time moved on and education changed and more people were getting degrees, they abandoned the scheme.
Why did you not stick to it? Why did you go straight back to police officer?
Oh, because by that time I had about 5 years service, 6 years service in the police, and I knew it was the career for me. It's what I wanted to do.
Is there a buzz doing it as well? Even though you must see a lot of dark, scary stuff, is there a buzz to then try to catch people? Because everybody's different. I've had a few police officers on, but everybody of them kind of in it for the right reasons. But then as time goes on, all the reasons change. Does it change as a person at the start?
Yeah, I think there's something in that. I think there's no doubt that being a police officer changed me as a person, but I think it changed me for the better. I think it made me, my son's currently serving not very far away from where we're sitting. Mm-hmm. And, when he joined, I said to him, that I hoped that he would mature as a person in the same way as I think I did as a result of being in the police.
Mm-hmm. So what was it like then getting your first case or catching your first criminal?
Oh, I remember the very first person I ever arrested. It was an Irish lady called Mary Kelly, who were arrested for being drunk and disorderly in Tottenham. It's funny. I think most cops will always remember the name and the circumstance of the first person they arrested. But I had this kind of strange career where because I was on this promotion scheme, I couldn't do the normal path towards becoming a senior investigating officer. So I never did the role of DC or DS. I was in uniform until I was an inspector. So it wasn't really until I was a DI and I had about 11 years service, I think, by then, that I got involved in being, the deputy on a murder and doing serious crime. But there's a story in my first book that I relate it again now. I was back in 1983. I was a uniform constable at Tottenham. We'd been on doing some overtime, and a friend and I stopped off at a party that I knew was going on in Enfield. And as we were driving home, we saw this shop that was on fire, and there was no mobile phone. So Andy Taylor, who was with me, ran down to find a phone box, and I managed to get through a shop, through a restaurant that still had people there, and get to the back of this shop and go in through the fire escape, and just got confronted with this place that's completely ablaze. It was like a haberdasher's that sold net curtains. So you imagine how they went up, But of course, there was a flat at the very top, and there were two people in there that ran the shop, and they died. So it was a murder. It was obviously an arson. It was a murder investigation. And I felt really bad about it for a bit, because I thought, could I have done more? And I was just dressed like I am now, and I had no protection at all. And if I'd have gone in there, I think I'd have ended up dying with them, to be quite honest. But the powers that be in the police sort of, I think, recognised this, and I had to go down and make a statement about what I'd done and what we'd seen. And the guy who was the SIO sort of said, I've squared it. You can stick around and work with the team for a few weeks. It might make you feel you're doing something towards what went on. And I'd never been into a murder room before, and a murder team room. And when they sit down and have these briefings, and the SIO sits there at the sort of head of the horseshoe, and all the team are recounting what they've been up to, and he sort of keeps this mantra going almost. What have you done? What do we know? What does it mean? What do we do next? And it was kind of like that, and he's writing away in his book. And it was that sort of moment, like the kid that sees the fireman ringing the bell on the fire engine. I thought, wow, that's just such a job. I'd love, one day I can do that. I could do that. I'd love to do that job. And of course, it took a few years, and I got to do it. But once I got it, I wouldn't let go of it.
Mm-hmm. What's it like seeing trauma for the first time? Did you see much as a kid before you joined the police force?
No, not at all. No, I mean it's.
So how is that? Is that difficult? Because I've spoke to a few police officers, and they'll tend to say a lot turn to like drink and stuff. There's not enough help for police officers because of the stuff that they actually see, which is sad. But how is that when you see trauma? Like for the first time, is it just to kind of get on with your job, or is there help there for you to speak about it?
Certainly back in the 80s, it was in the early 80s when I joined, it was just get on with it. There's no phrase that people still use to say, if you can't take a joke, you shouldn't join the job. Mm-hmm. And they can't say it in those circumstances when something horrible happens, or something horrible happens to you, or whatever. It changed. I mean, it changed after Broadwater Farm in 1986. It was 85, yeah. Because shortly afterwards, in early '86, I was doing a course at Hendon at Police College, and they had a nursing home there, and they had a lot of the officers who'd been involved in Broadwater Farm riot, and it was like something from MASH on the telly,
What happened there at the riot?
Well, it was an uprising, I suppose, in against the Broadwater Farm estate. Sorry, edit that bit. Let me get the third. Broadwater Farm Estate in Tottenham was an estate built in the 60s, and for various reasons, it had a high concentration of sort of problem quote families as well, and a high concentration of ethnic minority families. And there was drug dealing. There was a lot of crime around on the estate, and it was kind of the sort of place that could be made into a fortress, if you know what I mean. There were sort of 3 entrance points, and you've got these big buildings and walkways, and a very difficult place to police. Now, I was a community officer there for about 3 or 4 months, and very difficult time in my service. And by the time October '85 came, there was a lot of resentment about how it was being policed, and there was an incident, and then there was a deputation after the incident. The incident was a woman died at her home, not on the estate, after a police search, during a police search, and there was a deputation, went to the police station, and tension had been quite high, and it ends up with a few things being thrown, and then it all went back to the estate, and there were false calls made to police to call them onto the estate, and then they were attacked with bricks and bottles and petrol bombs, and the whole thing just carried on for hours. And of course, during that time, there was a fire crew that were trying to put a fire out of one of the shops on the estate, and they were given a police serial group of police officers to try and protect them. And they were all attacked, and as a result of that, 2 police officers kind of fell over as they were trying to retreat. One of them, Keith Blakelock, was murdered, and the other one was seriously injured. And yeah, I mean, it was a kind of dark day in policing for so many reasons, but there were a lot of people there who saw things that traumatized them greatly. And I say I wasn't there. Thankfully, I'd been transferred as a sergeant by then, and I was working elsewhere. But you hung around in Hendon at that time, and there were a dozen or so people in the nursing home who were suffering from what we'd now recognise as PTSD, and I guess it's the early days of it being recognised in the police service then.
Yeah.
And it was a powerful image to see the effect that being involved in something like that can have on a human being.
What was the first bit of trauma that sticks out in your mind where you think, shit, man, that, and you probably didn't realise it then that affected you, but you look back and you think, okay, that was a trigger point for something?
I think the one that I really remember was, funnily enough, my very last day of duty at Tottenham, and we had to deal with a road accident where essentially, because of the traffic for the football match, there was a car tried to do a 3-point turn Tottenham High Road and was T-boned by a much heavier car. It was an old Mini, was the car that did the 3-point turn. It was a big Rover that hit it. And it was a bad accident, but the little girl who was in the back of the car, a 5-year-old girl, was kind of thrown out through the side window of the Mini and died. And I say it was my very last day. It was I think it was New Year's Day. It was kind of after the holiday. And I was acting as sergeant then. I was getting promoted literally the next day, and going off on my course. And the inspector asked me to do various things, like deal with the family and go and see them. And it was the first time I'd come face to face with recently bereaved people, and where that bereavement was a child. And you kind of got 2 things there, and it was just also senseless and so hopeless. And so it was a bank holiday, and there's a little girl in the back of the car, and they're just trying to get through the traffic to go and see their family.
How do you deal with that then, Colin? Especially later on in your career when you're trying to kind of come away from it all and chill out a bit.
Yeah, it's there were certain. I dealt pretty well with the fact that there were things that I saw and experienced that most people don't even know about, let alone see. And that there is a whole different world to the life that you and I live, and you never know how other people live their lives and what happens in those lives. So I kind of separated that out pretty much from the beginning and pretty early on. And I guess I developed a thick skin, and I guess that it was only the few occasions when that thick skin was pierced that were the ones that I really remember, and some of those, I've been lucky enough to be able to kind of share by having them dramatized in the two dramas, and probably a mark of how good the dramas are, that I felt all the same emotions when I was watching it being enacted that I did at the time. One of those in the most recent series was this business of this woman she was actually 93 years old, and when she's grasping my hand and whispering to me, he interfered with me, and my head spun, and I knew that I had to carry on being professional and do what I had to do, but I just wanted to burst into tears and to hug her, because it was just this lovely old lady and what she'd been put through. And it kind of brought it home to me that there are still things that I can find emotional. And in some ways I'm pleased about that, because if you do 30 years as a police officer and you're relatively, active and operational, then you do see an awful lot of sadness and human frailty and, all the other things. And it can, it was almost reassuring to know that it could still get to me.
You're still human.
Yeah.
Because you become cold. I'd imagine you would bottle all that shit up to then try and move on to the next job and catch the next criminal. And that's why shows like this are so important, because a lot of people from the streets have grown up to not like the police, to not cooperate, to hate on them. And if you're active and being bad, it's understandable that the police are your enemy. But it's to show that police officers are human.
Yeah.
The shit that they need to say, day in, day out, rapes, murders, suicides, overdose, a lot of bad stuff, and that affects them mentally. It scars them for life. Like, people are out there trying to clean up the streets. Like, no matter in life, there's always good and bad. I always say this, but no matter if you're a cop or no matter if you're a nun or a priest, there's good and bad.
Yeah,
it's just life. But it's to show people that we're all kind of human and kind of all under the same sky, try to fight the same battle. But it's to show people that what you actually have to go through to then try and survive, because then you eventually have family and kids, and if you're seeing bad stuff every day, it must play a massive part in your mental well-being.
Yeah, absolutely, it does. It's funny you talk about the kids, because you kind of try and shield them from it a bit, and my kids were young when I was investigating murders all the time, and what do you do at work today, Daddy? Well, it's just you try and sort of shield them from that and keep that separation. I think I've come out of it relatively unscathed. I'm in a sort of a happy place, but the fact is that there are many who don't, and thankfully that's being recognised within the service now. And you've got, I don't know, just lots of little initiatives and things, just a phrases. It's okay not to be okay. It's a phrase,
Yeah.
And you kind of realise that actually quite often all it needs is somebody to talk to about it, and just say how you feel. But it's encouraging people who are in, if I say a kind of a macho culture, that's not reducing it or excluding it to men, but because it's that kind of tough culture anyway within policing, maybe it makes it even more difficult for people to say, do you know what, this is getting to me? Do you know what, I can't cope with this.
Yeah.
And they must be allowed to, and they must be able to, and they must have help to get through it.
Do you become more protective towards your family and kids, Colin, as time goes on, especially in the murder investigation scene, when you're seeing some horrific things? That do you become so protective because you know how bad the world can be sometimes?
Yeah, I think it's right. I think it's wider than that, really, James. I think actually police officers are far more fearful of crime than everybody else because of what they've seen and what they know.
Yeah.
And so I'll be with my wife or with my friends who haven't been police officers, and when I sort of say, "Well, let's be a bit careful here," or what, they say, "What's up with you? You're paranoid about it." I said, "No, I'm not paranoid. I know what goes on. You don't understand what goes on." So, yeah, it does. It does. Some would say it just makes you awfully cynical about other human beings. Perhaps it does, but it kind of, you know things or appreciate things that others don't. And they're probably better off for not knowing it and not appreciating it, But
how hard is it to see the beautiful things in life? Like, there's so much goodness and so many beautiful things, but how hard is it when you're constantly seeing negatives? Like, I had a man just on before you called Daniel Cross, who, great man, who when you watch the news, you see horrific crimes and things happening, and you never think that will never happen to me. But he was on the phone, his house was getting burgled. his wife phoned him, says, look, I think there's somebody trying to get in. The guy got in while he was still on the phone. He was working away and he heard his wife get murdered. The guy tried to kill the kids also, but the wife protected the kids, but she ended up getting killed in the crossfire. And then they tried to take the kids away, but thankfully the police were there in time. And he's like, fuck me, that can really knock somebody. But that man never let that defeat him, because I know people, childhood trauma is a big thing. The kid at 6, his son's seen that trauma, and he's still affected by it 6 years later, and it's understandable. But Dan himself has now opened up a strongman mental health thing that he pushed through and try to understand that you can kick on in life. Bad things do happen, but it's just crazy that when you actually speak to people, you realise, fuck me, like some people are so blinded by actually some of the serious stuff that goes on, which you would have probably seen. Like in the murder investigation, like how many murders did you get called out to?
Oh, called out to, I really don't know the number, because we'd also this sort of on-call stuff for once a week, where we'd kind of start it off and then hand it over to somebody else. But I think I was responsible for 39 as senior investigator officer over the years. But do you know, sometimes, I mean, what you're saying about that man, I mean, he sounds absolutely remarkable. How can you, you know, how can you even start to understand what he's been through? But occasionally, what does make you realise that there's still hope for humanity sometimes is that out of something as tragic and as awful as that, some good can come. And you know, he's channeled all the anger and maybe bitterness and sorrow and grief that he had, and obviously would have had about it, and challenged that, and channeled that to be a force for good. One of my cases that I did, that we did a program about it in the Sky Crime documentary series that I did earlier in the year. There's a lad, 18-year-old lad called Christopher Donovan, who was essentially kicked to death in one of the most stupid and senseless murders I think I ever came across, where literally he's walking with his brother and a friend, and another group of young people come towards him. They're all a bit drunk, the other group have been taking a few drugs. And there's just a silly argument. There's two groups of kids walking along in the street, you know, and it turns into a fight, and he ends up getting kicked to death. And it's just completely avoidable and pointless. And I saw his parents, Ray and Vi Donovan, very soon afterwards when I got given the case to investigate. And they're just the most remarkable people that you know, they were sort of committed Christians, very ordinary people, but very sensible people. And they grieved, they had the sorrow, they had the bitterness, they had the anger that everybody has in those, you know, it's natural to have in those sort of circumstances. And when that trial was over, and they did the thing that so many bereaved families will do, and that they'll come up as if you've been some kind of saviour for them. And I always find that's the worst time, because it's the time I realise there's nothing else we can do for them. We've investigated their loved one's death. We've taken it to court. There's been a conviction. The perpetrator's going to prison. Still doesn't bring him back, does it? Still doesn't bring her back, the loved one. And I can't do any more for you now. You know, well, I suppose I can do, and did with them, because I've stayed in touch with them to this day. But what they did, I think, with the help of the sort of counselling they got and through their church and so forth, they formed a trust in his name to promote restorative justice and to try and divert young people away from crime. And they've both got OBEs now for what they've done for their services to justice. And they go around to prisons, they go around to schools, they've got this charity. And none of that good would have happened if Christopher hadn't been murdered. Yeah. So, you know, and so that's why I try and support them as much as I can. They have sort of carol services and things at Christmas with the Met Choir, and I go down to that. And I say, try and support them with it. So I think that's, you know, that's really my answer. It's a long-winded way of saying, yes, sometimes in amongst all this mayhem and grief, something good can evolve. And it's those things that make us think, actually, we're not all doomed.
Yeah.
You know?
Did you have to see all the 39 murder cases? Did you see all dead bodies?
Yeah, pretty much so. I think so. Certainly, yeah, I think so. The senior investigating officer really should always go to the post-mortem examination. They're obviously they're grisly things, and but once you've been to one or two, it kind of you become a bit sort of hardened to that as well. They take an awfully long time now. And when I started, they would take 2 or 3 hours. You can be in there now for 8, 9 hours because the progress of science and the investigation of science has meant there are so many more things that can be done, and so it takes longer to do. Yeah, I once did 11 on the same day. I was a DI, and there was a case of a fire at an unlicensed cinema in Smithfield in London. And the guy who was refused admission set light to the place, and 11 people died. It's back in, I think it was 94. And yeah, did all 11 postmortems in one day. That was a bizarre day. It was just such a production line almost. We had 2 pathologists, 2 scenes of crimes officers, 2 photographers, 2 exhibits officers, 2 slabs side by side, and I was sort of overseeing it all. And yeah, they did 6. We went and had lunch and came back and did the other 5. And it was just
That's mad how you can harden yourself.
that's the sort of that's the sort of day, James, when you get home and you think, shit, what kind of a day at work was that? You know, it's just absolutely mind blowing. But I mean, it's very unusual.
Yeah.
But things happen like that. Sadly we have terrorist attacks. We have tragedies, disasters, and things where somebody has to do all that. Somebody's involved in sorting all that out at the end.
And you just go straight back into work the next day, any time, no time off, nothing. It is mad like that. If I see ants on the road, I'll step over them because I don't want to hurt them. Never mind getting into work and seeing 11 bodies burnt to the ground. Like, it just shows you, like I say, for people watching this to understand that what police officers have to go through to then.
And firemen.
And firemen.
Firefighters.
Doctors as well. Nurses. Got to see all that shit. Like,
ambulance,
But I'd imagine it would make you so cold that it would be difficult to adapt to normal life because that's not normal things you see. You see people in the army as well seeing that terrible shit. And the majority of people are homeless, are ex-military, and because as human beings we shouldn't be seeing darkness like that. But like you says there, that it happens and somebody's got to be there at the forefront to do it.
Yeah.
So when you started moving through the ranks then, Colin, because you became very at the top of your craft, like, how did you keep getting promoted? Just because of the work and
I was on this sort of scheme. So essentially, if you came, how it worked back then was you could take the sergeant's exam for promotion if you had 2 years service when you'd done your probation. And I was encouraged by my then chief superintendent to take it at the very first opportunity, which was I had 2 years and 3 days service, and I took it. And if you passed in the top 100, I think, in the Met at the time, you were then given an interview to go on this accelerated promotion scheme. Well, I came 27th, I think, so I was quite high, and got on that, went on the interview, got through that, and then had to go to one of these 3-day extended interviews up in Lancashire, actually, where you had to do all sorts of exercises and things over 3 days and write stuff, and you're interviewed. And I got through it, and I got selected for this course. And it meant that in January 1984, as I say, the day after that fatal road accident I talked about, I was off down to Bramshill, which was then the police college in Hampshire, to do a year there on what they called the special course as a sergeant. And that was sort of half and half law and procedure and half sort of management and leadership training. It was it's a big Jacobean mansion in 270 odd acres of Hampshire countryside. It was just a wonderful place to live for a year. I was the youngest on the course. I was only 23 when I went down there, and I made some friends for life there from people who were on other course from other forces and from the Met, and they looked after me because I was the baby. Particularly a couple of ex-military guys on there, both ex-Marines who I became friendly with and so took care of me. I had a wonderful time. I mean, I played It's like university. You had Wednesdays was sports day,
Mhm.
and they had a football team, they had a cricket team, so I played in both of those, and had a great time and passed the course at the end, and that meant I came out as a sergeant, and I only had to do 1 year as a sergeant in uniform. And because we'd taken the inspector's exam while we were down there, we were qualified for inspector. If we did a satisfactory year as a sergeant, we were inspector.
How many ranks is there in the police force?
Oh God, don't ask me. There's 8
Is
or
there
9.
a-
Yeah,
is there?
I say, hey, yeah,
So the first one is the beat. That's just
yeah. Constable
street cop.
starts off, then you go to sergeant, and then inspector. So I was a uniform inspector in December 1985, having joined in January 1981. I had like 4 years, 11 months service. I was 25 years of age,
Mhm.
and I was in charge of a whole response team at Leighton in East London.
What's the top one?
Oh, the commissioner's the top one.
Is that?
Yeah, the Met. You see, the reason the Met has other levels as you get
Mhm.
really high up that county forces don't have. But I mean, it's very bottom heavy, the rank structure. There are only a very few at the very top, and then it gets down. So
Mhm.
I achieved the middle ranking role of chief inspector, detective chief inspector. Only a smallish percentage of all police officers ever attain that rank or higher. So, but it wasn't for me about necessarily having the best rank I could or the best results. I always counted myself, I still count myself really lucky that I spent 30 years doing a job where I loved going to work every day. And so few people can say that other than podcast hosts. But
That's true, bro.
but it is, it's right though, isn't it? If you, I don't know where you're from, but where I came from, there were factories nearby, and you'd see, when I was a kid, you'd see all these men, mostly men actually, but some women obviously as well, but cycling to and from the factories. They had these big yellow plastic capes they used to put over their bikes because they could, and they're going to a factory every day. In other parts of the country, you've got people going down coal mines every day. And I've been down a coal mine, a proper coal mine up in Yorkshire in the 90s. And I have to tell you, as far as I'm concerned, those guys who did that, pay them whatever they were asking for, because there is no way on earth I could do that every day for a working life.
Yeah, tough old job.
So there's so many people who have to work, are motivated to work, decent enough people. I'm not going to rely on the state. I'm not going to rely on handouts. I'm not going to try to turn a crime. I'll do this job even though I hate it because I want to provide for myself and my family. And they do that. And there are lots of people who do that. And I was lucky enough to be doing something I could do that. And I loved every minute of it.
Yeah.
So, that was always my kind of motivation really was to enjoy what I was doing. And when I started being a senior investigating officer, it was just the best job in the world. I just loved doing it, which is probably why I did it for so long.
Yeah. What about your books? How many books have you got out, Colin?
I've got, excuse me, I've got 2 out, and both of them came out to coincide with the Manhunt, Martin Clunes TV dramas, because they were the books upon which they were based. So one's been out since 2019. It's just called Manhunt, and that's not a title I particularly wanted, but ITV forced it on us, and it's made no sense to make the book and the TV under a different title. And that deals with the Levi Belfield investigation. So that was, Levi Belfield was this horrible serial murderer and paedophile who is the only man ever to be given whole life sentences at 2 different trials in the country. He killed 2 young women in South London, tried to kill another one. That was my case. And of course, he'd also killed Millie Dowler, which was the Surrey case, and he got convicted of that as well. So that's the book about that one, the first book. And then the next book is about the Darragh Grant investigation that we mentioned at the start, where was something after Belfield, and before I retired, I was just asked to go and sort of do a review really for a couple of weeks, and probably made the mistake of coming up with an idea that somebody liked and got the gig, as it were. And I'm glad I did, because we succeeded, and we took him off and stopped these old people from being terrorised in their own homes.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to not think that you've done some good by doing that. So they're the 2 books. I've got another one that I'm contracted to write, but I'm not quite sure when that's going to be finished, because the story hasn't really finished yet. And that's about some murders that happened in London during the 1970s that I did some review work on when I was in the police, but kind of we all got put on the back burner.
Yeah.
But it's a fascinating story. So yeah. So yeah, I'm pretty. They're both out. Manhunt, The Night Stalker.
Yeah.
They're all on Amazon, normal places.
We'll leave links in the description because
Yeah.
why do you think that true crime sells? Why is that such a turn on for people? Like you go into Netflix, you go into it's all murders, it's all serial killers. Like why is it so much a attraction for human beings?
Well, I think it touches on what we talked about earlier on, James. I think it's kind of the fact that it's so removed and so different to other people's lives. And by reading about it, seeing about it on television, hearing about it on podcasts, they can kind of try to understand and try to imagine what it's like being involved in that, and and how it is for both the victims and I guess for the perpetrators and for the detectives as well. But you're right. There's an apparently inexhaustible sort of demand for it at the moment, both here and abroad, it's interesting watching the audience reaction to Manhunt and Night Stalker over the last few days. It has been amazing. I know Twitter's not the world, is it? Thankfully, but it's a window to the world, or a window to some of the world. And the reaction. I'm told. No, I don't crunch the numbers on things like this, but I'm told that the tweets about the third episode, which was the night before last, third episode of Manhunt 2, exceeded the number of tweets for not only the first 2 episodes, but also the whole of the previous series, all put together. Yeah. I've been sitting there, my wife and I've been sitting there sort of scanning it and going through it and trying to reply to people that ask reasonable sort of questions. But what actually stands out is the number of negative tweets out of the literally thousands and thousands we've seen. It's 3 or 4. I'm blown away by the audience reaction to it because there were no car chases, no fights, no gunshots, and I wasn't an alcoholic who was having affairs. It was kind of, it's none of the sort of tropes and the normal sort of fictional detective stuff, but it was just about what it's like for these detectives who are, they're ordinary men and women who just do a particular job, and it's what it's like to be in their shoes to go through that. And that's what I've tried to do with the books, is give it from the point of view of this is, I don't want to write a book about Levi Belfield or Delroy Grant. I don't want to see them on the television. I don't, they're worthless. But the people who did the work to put them in prison to stop them, they're worth 1 million of them. Yeah, and that's who I wanted to write.
So the first book, because you've worked in, that's near enough 2 of the biggest cases in the UK, like they're mega cases, like to be involved in them. But the first one, the serial killing one at Belford, is it Belford?
Belford, yeah.
Like, how do you deal with that? What's the game plan when you see young girls getting brutally murdered? Was it 4?
Yeah.
And then how do you?
Well, 3 in an attempt.
So how do you deal with that then at the start? Like when you get put forward to then try and catch one of the biggest serial killers on the loose at that time?
The first reaction is, am I up to it? I'm not going to lie. That was, that's how I felt.
In what way?
Well, I know this is going to be really high pressure. When you watch, when you read a book or you watch a film or whatever, there's always this pressure, isn't there, on the detectives. Can they catch him before he strikes again? That's what is so common. I was living that for real. That was going to be my life. I was actually literally on me was going to be that pressure. If we don't catch him, how many more is he going to kill? And that's a big old responsibility to take on. And I think if anybody said they would never have the slightest doubt they were up to it, then I think they'd probably be telling lies. I think everybody would ask themselves. And you kind of think, well, I'm trained for it. I've done the courses. And it's a funny thing about investigating serial crimes like this. There are only a few detectives who get trained as senior investigating officers, full stop. Only a few of those get trained to do these serial cases. And only a very few of those actually get to do one live, because thankfully there aren't that many of them. So when it comes, it lands in your lap, you sort of think, well, would there be anybody else who's better? I really did. but I came to the conclusion, well, someone's got to step up. Someone's got to do it. Someone's got to take that risk of feeling that you'd failed on something really important. That's the risk, isn't it? Is that, if I don't do a good job, if somehow we mess it up, other people might well be dying. And that's a huge thing to bear.
So that's another bit of pressure. So when you're on a case like that and then it strikes again and somebody gets murdered, how do you feel with that? Does that totally deflate you and thinking more pressure that...
Well, fortunately,
do you feel like a failure that time?
It didn't happen, but with Belfield, because before he struck again, we did arrest him. But although it took a long time to get the evidence and to convict him, he was at least arrested and on remand, so he couldn't do any harm. Oh God, I think it would be devastating to me personally. I really don't know how I would go on and cope living with that every day, that I'd messed something up and somebody had died as a result. And it's I say, just fortunately it didn't happen, but until he was locked away, that was a reality. That was the reality that you were facing that, and it wasn't just me. There's a team. I often say this. Most of the team, most of these detectives who are on these murder squads are very experienced, very talented, highly trained officers. And actually, the difference between them and me is I get paid just a little bit more for signing the pieces of paper at the end of the day and making decisions. So they would have felt the same, I'm sure. And in cases where it's happened, I don't know. I don't know how those officers must feel, but it'd be a weighty thing to have on your mind, wouldn't it?
What was his motive for his killings?
Well, we don't really know. He's such a narcissistic, self-centered person. He kind of just did whatever he pleased all the time, and it didn't matter what effect that had on another person. It didn't matter what effect that had on the legality of what he was doing. He was just just did what he wanted, and all that mattered to him was him. What we were able to work out from the Amélie Delagrange murder was that she was walking along the road, and because we had so many CCTV sightings of Belfield in his van, we worked out that at one point he must have driven past her, and because it then took her longer to get from the point we last saw her before he went past her to the point where we last saw her. I'll explain this very well, but basically she'd either slowed down or she'd stopped for a time, and that was the time when the van was near her. So we think, knowing what he's like and what people have told us about him, we think he was cruising around looking for a young woman, not necessarily to murder, but to chat up and take away in his car, maybe drug and rape, because he did do that as well. And when she said no in that exchange at the side of the road, he let her go and then followed her out of the car and bashed her on the head.
What sort of stuff was he doing to the woman?
That was it. That was all he did. That's all he would do with these blitz attacks. And he carried out a number of them. Because apart from the two that died and the one that nearly died, there's at least another two that we know of that survived. He would just, we think, best guess we can say, and until he comes clean, shows some remorse and admits it one day, we'll never know what motivates him. But what we think is that he would drive around looking for a young woman to pick up, and when they gave him a brush off, he would get out of the car and hit them on the head. And it's kind of as simple and as stark as that.
See, when they get found guilty, does the officer still try and go back and speak to them to try and get remorse, to see if there's anybody else he's done or any bodies hidden?
It was tried with both Belfield and with Delroy Grant, but because they both said no, we didn't do it. So how can we help you when we haven't done it? We're not guilty. We've been wrongly convicted. So you get nothing from them. Nathan Easton, who was the DI, fabulous bloke, who was on the DI on Operation Minster on the Delroy Grant case. He shortly before he retired, which was sometime after me, he went to see Delroy Grant in prison in the hope that he could get him to finally explain and talk to him. And Delroy just simply said, "Fuck off." So they said, okay, then, and had to leave it at that. Can't make these people talk.
Yeah. Do you ever get any serial killers? There's people who's come forward and they've been lifered off and they've says like, okay, there's a body there and a body there.
Yeah.
Have you ever came across that yourself?
Not personally, no. But I mean, I know it has happened on a number of occasions, yeah. But it's there's a sort of a campaign, isn't it, to have a law to say that murderers can't be paroled unless and until they give up where the body's buried. And I kind of think that, I mean, it's kind of adding insult to injury, isn't it? It's bad enough having a loved one murdered, but then not being able to have a proper funeral, not having that
closure,
that proper closure. Yeah, I mean, closure is a funny word. I don't often use it really because, as far as I've seen, I've spoken to more recently bereaved people than that's probably good for one individual, but I have, and they all react in different ways. And I always tell them there's no right or wrong way, because God forbid you or I wouldn't know how it reacts until it happened, and let's hope it never does. But I think what the bereaved victims do is learn to live with it, as opposed to getting closure. I think every day they miss their loved one. Every day they probably think about them. But what they do is they learn to have some sort of life and carry on life with that knowledge.
Yeah.
You can never, they'll never get over it completely, because you can't.
I says that in my last interview there, that time's not a healer, that you adapt to the pain, you learn to live with it, you learn to deal with it and move on with it. But we all face pain and trauma. Because Peter Tobin in Glasgow, do you ever remember that case?
I know.
He was a sick fuck. He had he was working with the priest, but I think he was shagging hookers himself. Like, I think it was all fucked up. Like, he had the young Polish girl and he buried her
in the church.
In the church,
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, in Glasgow. But I think he's done a few.
Yeah,
and I think they're digging up gardens and stuff.
Yeah,
but it's scary the amount of people that has went missing, and it could be all connected. Is that constantly playing your mind? Do you try and connect dots even when you're off work and you see things on the news and the newspapers that could be connected to something from 20, 30 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's funny how these things can sometimes come to the surface years and years later as well, I mean, there are still real, genuine mysteries out there, aren't there? There's still, many of them. I guess, I don't know. Yeah, this with the fascination with it, with kind of this demand for true crime stories, it won't go away.
Nah. What about all the murders you've investigated and speaking to the murderers? Did anybody ever just come clean straight away and put their hands up, or did they all plead their innocence?
Yeah, no, one or two did. One or two did put their hands up straight away. I mean, if you get, I don't know what the figures are now, say for London, 120, 130, maybe 150, I don't know, murders a year. Most of those, almost all of those, will be unplanned.
Yeah.
Will be spontaneous. And
is that correct? I thought it would maybe be gang related.
No, but even those, not quite often. The gangs don't go out.
They're not cold-blooded. They're planning it.
Yeah. They're not like Belfield, who thought, I'm going to go out tonight and get myself a girl, and if she says no, I'm going to kill her.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to switch my phone off. I'm going to drive around these streets where I know there's no CCTV, and things like that. This sort of planning.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to make sure that I've got gloves and I don't leave DNA or fingerprints. So many murders are that spontaneous that the people doing it don't think about CCTV, about their phone signal and communications data, about DNA, about fingerprints, and they do it. And because we as a society and the police still treat murder rightly as something big and the ultimate crime, they put lots of resources into it. So you get a whole team of skilled detectives with pretty much unlimited budgets for scientific work and forensic work. I mean, it is limited, but generally, if you want something done, you can get it done. And if you throw all that at these spontaneous crimes, it's pretty easy to find out who did it. And actually, you can end up arresting somebody and present them with so much evidence, they've got no choice to say, yeah, okay, it was me. But it's those little ones at the end, and that tends to be your serial murderers or people like Belfield and people like Grant, although he wasn't a murderer. They plan what they're doing. They know how the they might get caught and they take steps to avoid it. And when you've got that going on, they're the really tough cases. They're the difficult cases, you know.
Do you know that you can kind of tell something's not right with people sometimes, but sometimes these guys, you see a lot of the American ones as well, like a lot of films, they come across very well dressed, very polite, very smart, very manipulative, and narcissistic traits kick in. Like, have you ever sat across with someone and you think, how could you do that? Or was there always telltale signs that there's something not right upstairs?
I think, yeah. I mean, Delroy Grant's a good example of that in some ways, because he had a real double life. You see, when we charged Belfield with the murders and we spoke to people who knew him, they sort of said, yeah, it was only a matter of time. We always knew he was wrong, and we always knew he was weird. We always knew he was violent, psychopathic, whatever. When we spoke to the people who knew Delroy Grant, they told us we must have the wrong man. They said, no, it can't be Delroy. No, he's the mainstay of the cricket team. He's the bloke who we have a laugh and a joke playing dominoes with at the pub. He's a devoted carer for his disabled wife. Before she was so disabled, he used to go out with her knocking on doors with Jehovah's Witnesses. We have a street party in the cul-de-sac here, and he always does the barbecue and puts the music on. Yeah, he's just regular sort of nice guy bloke. You must have the wrong man. And so, and when, you know, if you watch reading the book or watch on the drama last night, it was absolutely true. I had this conversation with him about cricket. The first time I met him, he'd just been arrested. He'd just given a DNA sample that he knew was going to put him in prison for probably the rest of his life, certainly the rest of the good years of his life. And because he was dressed all in white, and because we stereotype a bit, it was a joke, really. It was like a joke, sort of an icebreaker, really, when they got introduced to me. And he was very polite, very respectful, bowed his head, shook hands with me, but he's dressed all in white because he's been given the plimsolls and jogging bottoms and a sweatshirt because they're taking his clothes from him. They're all white. And I thought, West Indian man, his age, he's probably into cricket and he'll understand the jokes. I said, are you batting or bowling? And just said it like that. And he seized on it. So he goes, are you into cricket? I said, yeah, I am. He says, but you don't still play. I said, I do occasionally, yeah. What, bat and bowl? Oh, no, my knees won't let me bowl now, but I still bat a bit, but not very well. He says, I still bat and bowl. Tell me, what do you think about the England squad going to South Africa for the tour this year? And I'm thinking, I said, well, we could do another fast bowler, but I think, yeah, I've been saying that to the boys at the pub, And we literally had a conversation that's gone on that long. And I said to somebody after this, it was a joke, an icebreaker. I didn't expect it to be like one of the rain interludes in Test Match Special. We just had this sort of conversation about cricket, and like you might do about football or anything else in the pub with the bloke, that. And that was, I now realise that was part of him, wasn't it? That was him. I was seeing the Delroy there that everybody else saw, that told us we had the wrong man, that told us he was the nicest bloke in the world, the life and soul of the party, and couldn't do enough for you. He was being that man there to me.
Is that a split personality?
I don't know. I'm above my pay grade, James. I don't know. I'm no psychologist, but he definitely had two personalities. Yeah, he had the one that everybody knew, and then the one that these old people lying in their beds got to know.
Yeah, before you got called into this court case, this to catch him, were you just about to retire?
No, I had about a year to go, so I was, and I didn't have to retire. They weren't really
forcing you.
Wouldn't have forced me out, I suppose. But I kind of wasn't sure what I was going to do, whether I was going to retire or not. And I was still with my own murder team that had done Belfield, working at Putney. And, I enjoyed working with them. They were so bloody good. They were a delight to manage and to lead. So I'd have carried on maybe for a bit beyond my 30 years. But what happened was that the year before I was asked to go over and look at Minstead, I ended up there. And I was there until my retirement date came up. And I was kind of underused really to a degree, because we arrested him and charged him. We were doing the papers for court. Weren't even finding any more evidence. Like with Belfield, we carried on investigating that all the time, so it was all circumstantial evidence. With Grant, we had his DNA. It was no contest really. So all I was doing was supervising the putting together of the case papers for the Crown Prosecution Service, and it got to the day when I could go, and I thought, well, I've had a good run. I've had 30 years. I've got to go sometime. To be honest, if I carry on coming to work next week, I'm coming to work for half pay, because I can get half of it and not turn up, the pension. So you kind of weigh things out. And I'm sort of 50 years old, just about 51. And I'm thinking, well, actually, I've got a few good years left still. Who knows? I might be able to do something else. And I didn't know what that might be. I certainly didn't think it would be all this sort of stuff. I got a job delivering flowers, When I first left the police, the first job I did was delivering flowers for like minimum wage for 3 florist shops in Surrey. But I loved it. I was on my own, just driving around with this van. Everybody was pleased to see me because I was giving them flowers, completely stress-free,
Yeah, sometimes that's all you want.
That's all I wanted, yeah.
So when you get called up for one of the biggest sex cases on the run in the UK, how long did it take for you to catch him?
Well, I went over to look at it, to do my review. I think it was the end of May in 2009. And I made some suggestions about how they should work and change it around, and they asked me to stay on. And I wasn't given the sort of the reins to it. The original SIO was still there, but he terribly sad. He'd had a really bad injury to his back some years before in the fight with the prisoner, and he was in a lot of pain. And he devoted himself so much really to trying to solve Operation Minstead that the Night Stalker, whatever you want to call him, he carried on and carried on and carried on when perhaps he really could and should have been given an ill health pension and not made to. He was in a lot of pain sometimes, Simon. And it's to his credit that he wouldn't do that. He was so determined to try and get through this. So he was still the senior investigating officer, and some of the things I'd suggested he completely went along with and took on board, and we changed the way it worked a bit. And then he had to go into hospital for a period for another operation on his back. And so I was given the kind of SIO role, and it was about the time then that I was able to get this surveillance operation going, and I had an amazing amount of help from other people in the Met who were real experts in their field, and they advised me and helped me immeasurably. We put this thing together, and we did it for 17 days, and it was in November 13th, 14th, I think, that he was arrested. So it's about 6 months altogether, a bit less than 6 months. It
took you 6 months?
But
so how do you, see when you come in, Colin, and this man's been at large for over 15 years, do you need to look at all the files over that period? How does it work?
Yeah, lock myself in an office with a load of dusty files. And there are a few videos I watched. Again, you've seen the drama, because some of the interviews of the victims have been recorded on video. Yeah, it's the only way to do it, because if you don't know something, the last thing I want to do is to come up with a brilliant idea, spend a couple of days writing a report on it, presenting it, and people who know the case better than me say, well, no, that's not true, because, I had to know all those becauses. So, I didn't have any choice but to get myself up to speed with it. And it took a while, and it was harrowing.
Yeah. So when Delroy done his first break-in and sexual assault and stuff, he never done it for a longer period after that as well. Is that correct? Because they thought maybe he was in prison, or there was a kind of break, or is there potentially that he could have been getting in, breaking into houses, raping them, but people weren't too scared to maybe come forward as well?
I think either or both, yeah. The first offence that he left DNA at rape was in 1992. They didn't get DNA from it straight away because DNA wasn't really a thing then. But in 1998, there was another one. And they did then get DNA for it. And by that time, they'd been kind of going back over the old exhibits and swabs and things from the old cases. And that's when the match came. Oh, this is the same man as well in 92. So that was what became the series and became Operation Minstead and was given to a specialist team to investigate. So there was nothing apparently between 92 and 98. And then even during the times that he was active, there were lulls. But the trouble was that because he didn't rape somebody every time, because he didn't indecently assault somebody every time, because he never left his fingerprints anywhere, because he knew that his fingerprints were on file. One fingerprint, he'd have been potted. I don't think we can be absolutely sure that there weren't other burglaries, because there have been all sorts of burglaries reported in London during those periods, and in South East London, where we know he only worked. I don't know how many of those sitting there in a dusty box somewhere might be Delroy Grant crimes. You know, I'm certainly the psychologists and forensic sort of profilers and things that I speak to are all very sceptical that he would go quiet for long periods unless there was a reason. So he was living abroad, or he was in prison, or he was in hospital, or something like that. But you know, say people like him don't just stop for a while and then wake up one day and think, do you know what, I'm going to start again. You know, it's not how their mind works.
Did he ever have a girlfriend, wife?
Did he?
Yeah.
Yeah, he had 2 wives.
Did they know about each other?
Sorry, yeah, no, he was married.
Oh,
and
married again.
Divorced
Yeah.
and married again. The first wife told us all about, you know, that she'd had a really terrible time with him in terms of domestic violence and abuse and things like that. The second wife, she contracted multiple sclerosis, and it was the sort of degenerative, progressive version of it. And she gradually became more and more paralysed and infirm and disabled. And he was looking after her. He was her carer. He was paid by the local council to be her carer, and apparently did a good job of it during the daytime. And then at night time,
he's out raping old
he's out
women.
raping old ladies. Yeah,
It's fucked up.
it's bizarre. And he had a girlfriend. We came across, and we found out after he'd been charged that he'd been working as a minicab driver in South London in the early 2000s, and as a result of that, we found out that one of his passengers had sort of started a relationship with him.
Do you think that's where he was finding a lot of his victims, though, in the cab, maybe dropping them off at home?
I think it's entirely possible, yeah. But I mean, what he was a creature of habit. He had a particular way that he liked. You know, vast majority of his offences, he'd actually remove a whole pane of glass. He went to houses where they were like 1930s houses, like the one I grew up in, and probably a bit like, I think, you know, my dad retired in, I don't know, 84, something like that, 85. And he used his retirement money to get the windows replaced. And the windows you'd get replaced at those times had beading on the outside. If you peeled it off, you could just take the pane of glass out whole. And he knew that. That's how he got into houses, most of them was by removing a whole pane of glass. So he had that, and he didn't do social housing. He didn't do flats. He only ever did houses and bungalows. And they were mostly of that sort of vintage, sort of 1930s places. And, you know, if you go down to the suburbs of South East London, or suburbs anywhere, and look at estates of these 1930s houses, you can see the ones where old people live. You still can. It's not just the grip rail on the side of the door, but, you know, they won't have had their garden concreted over to park 4 cars on because their children have got cars or something like that. The garage might still have the old double doors on. It just, you know, you can walk down any suburban street like that and old person lives how was shouting, and he knew that. He was switched on to that.
And he was at large for 17 years. How do you deal with that, Colin? Like going over old footage or interviewing someone in their 80s who's been raped. Like how do they even deal with that? Like the victims, like a lot of victims, I imagine, would be dead now. But
the vast majority of them, unfortunately, are. Yeah.
How heartbreaking is that for an officer to be going in?
Yeah, absolutely.
And listening to that,
absolutely. You know, it's just. I mean, yeah, reading. I got it all sort of secondhand. Reading, either reading their statements in most cases, or looking at the videos. Real live officers have sat down across the table like you and I and spoken to somebody about that. And what comes over to me is this, you know, the generation that we're talking about here are the generation that grew up either were children during the Second World War and they grew up with rationing and things in the 50s, and they're just a lot more sort of stoical. They're just a lot more reserved and quiet and suffering about their problems, I think. And that's why I'm sure that there are indecent assault and probably rape victims of his that we don't know about because they just didn't, they reported a burglary but didn't say what happened. Because sometimes it was a considerable time after the event that they'd come forward to us and say, well, actually, do you know what? This is what he did. This is what he did to me. Because people of that generation didn't like talking about intimate stuff like that. They felt shame, some of them. Absolutely no reason for them to, but you can understand, that they did. And that was really part of the motivation of writing the book and making it into the drama, was that what I realised was that these old people never had a voice. There was no Twitter. There was no petitions.org. There was no kind of Facebook groups, Instagram. They didn't have access to report what had happened to them. And we know from talking to journalists at the time, the newspapers were trying to get the youth market, and an editor apparently actually said to one journalist, people don't want to read about old ladies being raped over their cornflakes. So there was just no pressure put on. And we say it's true, Nathan said it to me, if the victims had been aged 18 to 35, it would have been dealt with by the media and by the police in a very different way. But they were aged 68 to 95.
Yeah. Imagine that, living your whole life in your 80s, a man, and then your house gets broke down and fucking guys coming in and raping you. How many charges was he charged with?
He was 29 eventually.
And he pled not guilty to everyone. Fucking sicko.
Oh, it's even better than that. His defence was like the comedy defence to beat all comedy defences. His defence was that in 1979, when he left his first wife, as he was leaving her because they were having problems, when they had sex, she saved semen and saliva. She got a doctor friend to keep it in a freezer at Guy's Hospital. And then in the 90s and 2000s, somebody went out with these samples, squirting them into old ladies' clothing. Yeah, DNA as an identification thing, wasn't a thing until the mid-90s, and it just absolutely implausible defence. It was comical if it wasn't serious, Yeah, but he I think I wanted to ask some questions about how society, how we deal with old people. And there was a wonderful scene in the drama last night with Colin Martin Clunes as me talking to the family liaison officer, and they see some old ladies standing talking in the street, and they're just talking about how they're invisible and how we don't think we're going to get there. We don't think we'll be that. We won't have the Zimmer frame and the bedpan and the forgetfulness, and because of that, it's kind of pushed to one side, and none of us. Perhaps I think that because I'm getting so close to it myself. You've got a few years to go, but it's a really serious point that these old ladies, mostly these victims of Derek Grant, were largely invisible, and nobody could speak for them.
How many victims?
We know officially, I think there's 204 offences. I suspect there are hundreds more.
Sad, isn't it? Do you think you would have retired if you never caught him? Do you think you'd have kept going an extra year or 2 years to eventually catch him?
Knowing me, myself, as I do, 100%, yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't have given up halfway through this. No.
You started putting, was it like spy cams everywhere? And how did you eventually catch him, Colin?
It's just really, it was by the very first meeting I ever went to, everything they were talking about was DNA. And I wrote in the margin of my book, what if I didn't have DNA? And that was just a note to myself. I think, okay, if I'm trying to think of other ways of doing this, everything they're talking about has got DNA. Let's take that away. Pretend we haven't got it. What do we do then? And it was kind of an extension of that. And I said, well, he's actually a burglar. We're saying he's a sexual predator. And he is. But every single yeah, he's really a sexual predator. We know he's no, that's wrong. I've got this all confused. Sorry, cut back again. Everyone was treating him because he was a sexual predator, and he was a sexual predator, but he was also a burglar. And that's the important thing for me, is that every single offence he committed started with a burglary. Some of them, a lot of them, went on to be assaults or rapes. There was a burglary there every time. So how do we catch burglars? And I sort of thought back to my time working on divisions and that, and all the way back to Tottenham when I was a wee lad. And we had this guy that was plaguing a tiny part of the division because all the houses had louver windows, and you could prize them out from the outside and he'd climb in through the window and burgle them. But he was so parochial, he was so restricted to one area that it took about 20 officers that we could get together. He'd sit in cars or borrow people's bedroom windows, and eventually he came along, did one, and he's arrested in the house, and he's sorted. So what I wanted to do was to scale that up and do it for a quarter of London. But it takes a lot more than 20 officers to do that in a quarter of London. So what we had to do was we had to get intelligent. I was talking to the crime analyst and saying, okay, let's try and narrow this down to a manageable area where we know he likes to offend because the housing stock and because the demographics are right. And the analyst did that for us. And we had about 70 or 80 people instead on still quite a big area to cover. And we just sat there hoping and waiting that he would come and do one in front of our eyes. And he kind of did.
Fell into the trap. Did he stay near that area, Colin?
Yeah, a few miles away, 3 or 4 miles away. Yeah. I mean, everywhere that he offended was actually reasonably close to where he lived. Yeah.
It's mad, isn't it? Like how people can go through that. Like, seeing you catch somebody like that, like, I'm not comparing it, but like, if I'd imagine for a football player scores a hat trick or something and is feel good, like when you do that, how good do you feel that you've brought some fucking sickle like that to justice?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm sure it is just like that. It's just, it's the two of the really sort of standout moments of my life when that jury foreman said guilty for Belfield, and when Nathan phoned me up and said, I think we've got him, Colin, because we knew once we'd got him, Grant, the trial wasn't an issue because we had DNA and it was going to prove it. It's a bit different. The trial was by no means a foregone conclusion with Belfield, but it was just, emotional. You feel pride. I felt so pleased for members of my team, particularly the Belfield one, because we had people who were so determined. They said, "No, it's right. I'm not going." They've been qualified for promotion, and they get offered a post. And they say, "No, it's all right. I'll wait for a little while. I don't want to be promoted yet." I had somebody put off their wedding, because they didn't want to miss being part of it. And so people have made sacrifices. I mean, it's a wonderful story about the Belfield investigation. That before we'd identified him, but when we'd identified his van, but we didn't have registration number, we knew the type of van. We kind of thought we had to find it around Twickenham. And I'd leave work rather, say, I don't know, 7 o'clock or something like that to go home. And I sort of think, I'll just give it an hour around Twickenham Green and nearby, just see if I can see this van. So I'd pull up there and I'd put radio on, Mr. 5 Live and football or something like that, and just sit there and watch for this white van coming past. But the number of times I saw other people of my team in their own cars doing exactly the same thing, and we never waved to each other. We never even discussed it at work because we'd have all been a bit embarrassed for everyone else to know that we were spending our own time trying to find this bloke. But I wasn't the only one that was at it. That kind of dedication like that gets to people, and they're special people sometimes, these cops.
So, seeing you caught Leroy was
Delroy.
Delroy. Delroy. So, see when you caught Delroy when he was dry, was that like a surveillance on him, or was it just you got the you knew that it could have been him? Was it just pounce on him straight away?
No, it was we knew what sort of car he drove from the first night of surveillance because he'd done some offences close by, but not in our area. but we knew he must have driven through our area. So we went to the CCTV at a local school, managed to identify what must have been his car. So we knew what colour it was and what sort of car. And that was the road I'd been down with Belfield, and I didn't want to go down again because finding a car in those circumstances is really tough. So we kept the surveillance going, and then one of the officers, he'd been into the same observation post in this building every night for 17 nights. And as they walked in, he saw this grey Zafira of the type that we knew he drove parked up. So he told everybody else that there's this sort of car that's not been there before and to be aware. And then sometime afterwards, Delroy, as we now know, came jogging down the street, got in the car and drove off. So what we then did was we had a mobile surveillance team nearby on standby. They were deployed behind the car, but what we needed to do was to try and get him as far away as possible from our area before he was stopped. Because otherwise he might think, if it's the wrong person, he's not arrested, it might otherwise show where we're doing observations. So we can't stop people there. We have to let them go away. So that's what they did. So they followed him for a couple of miles. And he was actually turned off a main road and into another residential area of sort of old residential houses. So part of the thinking at the time was, is he actually looking for somewhere else to break into? But in the meantime, we'd gone back around near where his car was parked and actually found a bungalow that he'd broken into there. So by the time he got stopped, it was pretty much, it was a pretty good bet that we had the right man there. But of course, the DNA confirmed it.
Do you think because of his character being the nice guy in the pubs and playing for the cricket team, that it's more harder to catch people like that because of it's not just a case of luck? Because even his crimes, like he's leaving fingerprints, he's leaving semen, he's leaving all the stuff that you need for a conviction, but yet it took 17 years to catch him.
I mean, he wasn't leaving fingerprints because that would have got him, because he had convictions going years back and his fingerprints were on file. He was very careful not to do that. But DNA he didn't care about because he knew we had nothing to match it to. But I think his character and his split personality, that made it more difficult to catch him because there was quite a bit of publicity, not as much as I think there should have been. There was quite a bit of local paper and local radio publicity around this case. But because people all knew him as Delroy Life and Soul of the Party, nobody would come forward and say, I think it could be him, because he'd done nothing to make people think that it could be him. Contrast that with Belfield, where we had people coming forward to us, including one of his ex-partners, saying, I think your murderer could be this man because, nobody was ever going to say that about Delroy because nobody knew.
Mm-hmm. Massive respect for catching those people. That honestly, that's what people don't see. Like, can you imagine one of these creeps like attacking your sister or climbing into your granddad's house? Like, it's mad to think that that happens. Like, that's sick shit that you don't really hear about unless you watch those dramas or read your book. Like, how do you feel now that your book's been turned into a successful TV drama? And Martin Clunes is playing your part.
I know. I mean, I just roll with it, James. It's all unexpected. I'll tell the story of how it came about, because when I finished working, I started writing. I always liked writing a bit. And I started writing this book, and I did about 20,000 words on the Belfield book. And thought, this is nonsense. Nobody's ever going to want to read this, let alone publish it. So I stopped, and a friend of a friend of a friend, like they do, got Ed Whitmore, who's the scriptwriter who writes Manhunt, got him to talk to me because he was doing something for BBC. It never got made, but he wanted some advice on authenticity for it. So he came and saw me in my house, and we just got on, and we got on really, really well. And Ed is like a complete walking encyclopedia of murder. I mean, and I've done some other work with him for fictional stuff as well. He'll sort of be discussing something. He'll say, what about in that case in Tuscany in 1997? And I'm saying, what? Why do you expect me to know about that, Ed? Because that's what he does, because it's his job. So he heard I'd started writing this book. We were just talking. He said, I want to see it. So I gave him what I'd written. And he read it, and he said, you've got to carry on. It's really good. You've got to carry on. It's great. I said, okay. So I took it with a pinch of salt. And unbeknown to me, he was working for Buffalo, the production company, on something else. And he said, there's a really good story that I think you'd be interested in making into a crime drama. But, we've got to persuade Colin to write it. And so I had lunch with him, and we talked about it, and they said, yeah, we want to option your book that you haven't written yet. So I said, oh, okay. And then Ed came and stayed with me for a week, and we did the first episode of the first Manhunt. ITV commissioned the whole thing on that, and all of a sudden I had a book to write and a script to help write all over summer of 2017. It was a bit busy, and we got it done, and that's it. That's where I am, sort of thing. And then we knew there was, I'd always thought that the Night Stalker story probably was a better story for dramatisation in some ways. But because it was so unknown, there's no way we could have done that first. We had to do the Belfield one first because everyone knew about Millie Dowler, everyone knew about Levi Belfield. And that gave us the sort of the weight or the sort of reputation with that one, so we could do the second one. And Martin Clunes it's his wife that runs the production company. And at the beginning, she said, I don't know who will get to play you, but it's not, I'm not doing this for Martin. And it was only when Ed had finished the script and we submitted the scripts and she showed them to Martin, he said, yeah, I want to do that. I want to play that. So that's how he came back. Great guy, really, really good guy, great company, good fun to be with.
Yeah, it's a fascinating life you've led, Colin. That some madness, some mystery, some darkness, and now you're living the celebrity lifestyle and people playing your parts and
wireless at best, James. But yeah, it's just, as I say, just roll with it. Life throws things at you. Take them in your stride.
Mm-hmm. Is there any cases that the people are still on the run you would have liked to have worked on?
I don't think so, really. I don't think so. I've got a fascination with the Lucan case, but that's been done on telly very well recently as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But no, not, I just say, take life, take things as it comes, and roll with it.
Yeah. Do you look at cases though, Colin, and think that you look at? Do you know the Bible John case? That was in the Barrowlands. The guy was just taking the girls and killing them.
Yeah.
Do you look at those old cases and see, because there was no DNA there's no forensics, so it's obviously harder then. Do you look at it and go, and in your mind you start putting the clues together? There's a lot of these people kind of have the same mind where they kind of think the same as well. Yeah. A lot of these cases that you do, is that correct, or is everyone totally different?
No, I think there is a lot. I don't think they're all totally different. I think there are things that connect. Yeah, certainly. It's but no, I just it's I sometimes look sort of jealously at think, oh God, it was the buzz of being in and amongst an investigation fast time. Was quite huge, really, sometimes. And I sometimes miss that. And then I remember the grief that it also brings, and the pressure that it brings. And so I think, actually, I don't miss it that much. It's easier telling stories than it is actually doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd imagine that being in a life of chaos can be quite exciting as well, because it's like you're in your own TV series. It's like you're in your own real life fucking film.
That's the remarkable thing for me. That's the sort of the head exploding point for me, is that millions and millions of people are watching these things and tweeting and saying how much they enjoyed it and how wonderful it was. That was my life.
Mm-hmm.
I lived that for real. That was my day at work. That was my day for years. And it kind of gives you it's sort of a head explodes moment. I nearly said head fuck moment, but it is, you know what I mean? You sort of think, hang on a minute, that's just life. That's just what I did, and so it's...
For over 30 years being a detective and not many people patting you on the shoulder, just your officers, not really knowing who you are or what you've done. But then when your story comes to the forefront, you see that you are a soldier, that some of these things that no human should see, no human should be witnessing, and you're there doing what you do, trying to catch real sick people. That's I take my hat off to you for that, Colin. But last question, brother, going forward for the future, man, what's the plans? We're getting films out, more books?
There's definitely one other book. There's definitely some more documentaries. I start filming, back in London, filming in October for The Real Manhunter Season 2, which is probably going to be the remaining documentary. No, sorry, put it another way. It's probably going to be the remaining sort of cases that I did that are suitable to be sort of made into a documentary and talk about. And plans for another sort of documentary for the year after about something a bit different that I'll keep them on tenterhooks about because it's not signed up yet. And as in terms of the drama, Ed Whitmore and I would love to do another series of Manhunt. It is possible that we might, but there's a lot of talking and negotiation to be done. You know, it takes a long time to get this, but if we can, we will, because I've just been bowled over by people's reaction to it and how much they like it, and so we'll see. But if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen.
No doubt it will happen. I think you've got that kind of temperament.
I'm used to disappointment. I'm a Tottenham Hotspur fan.
Well, I can clearly see that way you would be. But for anybody that's watching that's maybe wanting to join the police force, like, what advice would you give for them? Don't do it.
No, not at all. Hey, listen, I would say, if you think that you want to serve your community in a way that is exciting and interesting, dispiriting, boring, everything you can think of, it's a good job. And we need people to come forward and be it, because, quite frankly, we'd be stuffed without them, wouldn't we?
Yeah, numbers are going down as well, but I think there's a lot.
They're trying to get them up again now, but
which is sad, because crime seems to be rising as well. Not so much as through lockdown, but again now things seem to have picked up.
I think the big thing that I have a real issue with about recruiting is this nonsense to say, we've got to have people with degrees. Everyone's got to have a degree before they can be a police officer. Some of the very best police officers I worked with, the pleasure to work with or under, didn't have degrees. Many of them had a background in the armed forces, and they didn't have degrees. They make good coppers.
Last question, Colin. What makes a good police officer?
Common sense, knowing right from wrong, sense of humour.
Not many I've come across who've had any sense of humour, if I'm honest, Colin. But listen, I thoroughly enjoyed your story. A great character, great individual, and well done for all the work that you've done over the years. Like, it's unbelievable, and I look forward to seeing more series and more books out. Like, you've become I wouldn't say an overnight success, because everything that you've done that nobody ever seen that, but for what you've done and putting yourself at the forefront to see those horrific things, to then let other people sleep better at night, I take my hat off to you, and fair play to you. But God bless you, Colin, and
thank you very much.
Good luck for the future.
Lovely to meet you.
Likewise.